So I want to make a quick video on using Milliput and show you some pointers and not exactly tricks, but helpful hints. All right, I want to address working with Milliput here, and one of the first things I need to mention is the proper handling of when you're mixing it. I've seen people online doing this, and they'll just pinch off a piece with their hands, and they wrap up the bag and open the other one, and with the same fingers go in there and grab another piece off the other one, and then they mix them together, and the whole time they're cross-contaminating these two things. They're getting from one to the other. They're getting bits of this on that or this on that, and that's going to ruin your Milliput. You'll end up getting a hardened skin on the outside of it. It'll start to cure the Milliput. So you want to keep it as clean as possible when you're working with it, because you're only, like, for when you're working with restorations and things, you're only using a very little bit of this at a time. And one of these things probably lasts me months. Well, this one I bought last November, and I'm only halfway through it. So here's what you do. You open up. I always kind of work in the same order. It's just a routine that I follow, and I do it the same way every time. And once you've done it a few hundred times, it becomes automatic, and you don't have to think, did I cross-contaminate or not? Because you're always working with the same routine, and it's easier not to mess up that way. So I need to mix some of this right now, so I'll just open my bag. And I try not to touch it whenever possible. So I'm going to chop off a chunk of this. Also, if you keep these rolls nice and neat, they should end up being about the same length, because you're using the same amount of each one every time. And it's easier to cut off the same amount of each one. And so I like to roll it up into a little ball, nice and round, and then I'll set it on my tile, turn it so I don't touch that. Now I have it on my fingers and on my spatula, and so you can either use water, or in this case I'm using isopropyl alcohol, and just wipe off your fingers very quickly, and then wipe off the palette knife. Make sure you get the edges. And now we're ready for the other one. And I always wrap up the first one and place it aside so I don't grab the same one by mistake. Same thing here. I'm trying to keep it nice and clean. And I'm going to chop off another chunk of this. Now this is where you work to keep them the same size. So that's why we're roll them into a ball. I can see it's a little too big already, but I get it nice and smooth and round, and you can put it next to the other one, and you can clearly see that they are not the same size. Keep them from touching, and cut off a piece, and work your way down to the size you want. And just chop off a piece, roll it into a ball again, set them next to each other. It's still a little big. I'll cut off another little bit. And as long as you're within 5 or 10% of the size, they don't have to be exact, because we're just going to be using this as a fill. It's not a bonding agent at this point. Alright, and another way, let's put them next to each other, and then I can look at them at two different angles. That's a little bit short. Put some back on there. Okay. And there I've got two of the same size. And now you don't have to clean your fingers too much, but I do it anyway. because this stuff is not good to have on you, because you're going to touch your face. You don't know what you're going to touch with this, and you'll get it all over everything. And you don't need that stuff all over your workbench or your tools. You need to stay neat and clean in this line of work, or you're just going to create problems for yourself. So cross-contamination to be avoided as much as possible. Okay, now as far as mixing this, the directions just say mix it until it's thoroughly mixed. In the case of the white Milliput, there's not a lot of difference in the color. I mean, when you first start, it's pretty obvious. You don't have to do what I'm doing right now, but it actually speeds up the mixing. I'm basically cutting it in half, restacking it, and putting it out. So the idea is to mix this until the colors are even, and it's hard to tell with the white. So when you think you've mixed it enough, mix it for almost that same amount of time. It only takes a minute or two. What you'll see as we do this is I like to take from one side to the other, so I'm not just rolling it, I'm taking stuff that hasn't gotten mixed and mixing it in, and scrape this stuff off your mixing palette too, because that's unmixed stuff that was in that stack. I'll keep mixing this, and you'll see it's not sticking to the tool or anything. It's nice and smooth as you see these rolls as it mixes, and at some point it'll start getting sticky. It'll start sticking to the tool, and when that's happening, it's very thoroughly mixed. And it's starting to get there now. You see how it's got a little pick. It's not smooth anymore. It's starting to get, see how it's sticking to the tool. And that is thoroughly mixed. Now, you have about 15, maybe 20 minutes working time on this. It's soft and pliable when you first start. As it starts to set up, it gets harder and harder. That's good for filling. You can smooth it and push it into the cracks nice and easily. But if you're sculpting with it, you want to get it in place and then let it start to set up where it's a little bit hard. That way your tool's not sticking to it if you have to start shaping it and sculpting or something, and your tool, it won't stick to your tool. So just for mixing, that's the perfect right there. Okay, so I need to modify this Milliput. I've already mixed it equal parts and used some of it, and now I need to make some that's a little thinner than this. I need it to be almost like a fairly weak paste, because I'm working on something very delicate, and this is too stiff to spread it on there. I'll probably break it. So Milliput is very responsive to water. You can, with a paintbrush, you could probably mix this with water and it'll dissolve, and you can paint it on to fill very, very thin cracks. So now I'm just putting a spot of water on my finger, and I've created some cuts in here for this to go into so that I can mix it. And so that's basically 2 drops of water on this. And so now I'm just going to mix it, turn it over so I can get it mixed into those cuts I made. And I keep doing that, chopping and mixing. And you can see already it's starting to dissolve a little bit. I just keep doing that. Turn it over, mix and chop. And that forces the water to mix with the putty. And you can do this until you get this to the consistency you want. And I'm going to need some pretty thin stuff here. So I think I have plenty of water in it. If I can mix this, it'll be like a thin paste, like almost like plaster. It's mixing. I can still feel how stiff it is, but just keep chopping and pressing, and that mixes it together. And you can see it's turning into a nice paste. Now the idea here is to get the same consistency all the way through. Some of this is very, very thin like paint, and some of it's a little thicker like toothpaste. And I just mash it down until it's very smooth consistency. And now I've got this very close to what I need. Let's work it a little bit more. And that'll work. And I'll show you that how we use this. So, as you can see how this is very paste-like. It's perfect for my needs. The working time has not changed on this. I have plenty of working time on it. It just made it thinner. It's not going to set up on me as fast as it normally would. I'm working this paste a little bit more here. Just water. And so I'm going to brush it on here to fill these cracks. It's a little too wet right now. I'm going to get it. Whoops. I just keep working that wet in it. Keep working it back in until I get it thicker and thicker. It's going to be almost like a really thick paint that I'm going to spread on here to fill these hairline cracks. Now there's no way I can file this. So I got a little bit of paste here, and I got a bit of a step on this one. Fill that step. So I have a little bit of alcohol on this Q-tip, and I'm going over these cracks. What I'm doing is, if there's a step, I'm going off the high step so that I don't brush it out of the crack. But I have too much on here and I can't file it, so I'm wiping it off. And very gently. As you can see how it will remain where I need it. I'm getting my Q-tip just damp. Be patient. I'm very, very lightly wiping here. Milliput's starting to dry. It's not hardening, but it's drying a little bit, so it takes a little bit more effort to wipe it, and this is thicker right here too, so just need to be gentle and careful. Okay. And now I'm wiping the excess off of my Q-tip. And now I'll just clean up this over this wipe. It's important to get as much of that as you can off, because even where it looks like you've wiped it off, when that dries, there'll be some residue in it, and it'll be white. I've got a little bit of alcohol and water here, so I can blow on this and dry it as I go. Alright, so I don't have to paint this anyway, so can you see that okay without the glare? Alright, so that's how we use the thinned Milliput. So here's what I want to address here on this. I have filled this crack line earlier, and I thought that some of it was sufficiently well aligned that the cold glaze coatings would fill that gap. It didn't. So I need to fill it again. But the problem is, when you do this, it's very likely when I fill this with Milliput and then I go over it with a file, I'm going to chip or file away the cold glaze, and then creating more problems than a bigger area to fill than I have right now. So we're going to do something to avoid the filing, and so I'm going to demonstrate that now. So the key here is to get a nice thin coating of it, but to really force it down into that crack. So, because we're going to wipe this off with water, and we don't want to clean it out of the crack in the process, because it's very, very shallow. So you want to make sure we really pack it into that crack. Okay. Okay, so now I'm taking off the excess with my spatula. I'm going across the line so that I don't dig it out in the process. Okay, I got something like that. So now I have water on a Q-tip and a little square of paper towel just to wipe up the wet. So then this just wipes right off. We don't want to take anything out of that line. Nice and neat. And then wipe the water away, and there we have it. Now, when I cold glaze over that, it'll be nice and smooth. The reason I'm wiping this afterwards was I'm cleaning this off. You're getting the dissolved version of this on the Q-tip, and as this wet film is on here. If I just let that dry, there could be a haze left from that that'll be that you'll have to sand off and all that jazz. So that's why you wipe it, you eliminate that problem. Another question that people are going to be asking me is, why don't you do this all the time? That saves a whole lot of filing. And the reason is because in a lot of cases you have much bigger gaps like you have here, or even much bigger. And on a curved surface, you want to be able to keep the curve and not just file it or wipe it off. And sometimes with this tiny little line, if I wipe across it, I'm not going to dig it out. That's going to be perfectly level. But on something on a bigger space, as you wipe, you're going to actually dish that out a little bit or level it off. Then you have to come back and refill it again. And so filing is the best way to do that. And also on a lot of surfaces, like some of this is there's lots of pits and irregularities in the surface where the Milliput will collect, and it's just a lot easier to dig it out with a file than it is to try to do that with water. Also, on other types of pottery, there'll be much more texturing on the surface, and you want the files will give you a much more quicker removal of material and able to work around strange shapes and pits and lumps and textures, dimensional pottery.